Hi, welcome. My name is Teresa Tung. I lead our data capability at Accenture. I'm going to share the 6 new data essentials for the era of generative AI. Data is your core competency and your competitive advantage in the era of generative AI. And companies who have been investing in data, they have a head start. But the truth is that no data industry is ready for what generative AI needs. And we're going to share 6 new essentials that we've learned through doing over 1,800 generative AI implementations. So let's get right into it. Number one, your proprietary data is your competitive advantage, right? This is the data about your business where you have a unique vantage point. And when you're working with generative AI, this data is really critical to be able to make decisions that are specific to your people, your products, and your processes. So being able to invest in those data products, treating it as a product just like any real product that you might buy from the store, right, with the right trust, safety, quality. Here's where having efficient data supply chains using metadata to really be able to programmatically manage that data is ready to be used is really a key differentiator. So, just to bring this to life, right, even companies who might say, I'm never going to build a model, right? I'm not ready for that. Their proprietary data is so still critical to be able to engage in this space. So let me give you an example. We see, a model on from Meta. And in this case, I'm going to just ask a question to this model. It's going to say, I'm going to need to see what a men's coat for Boston in December might be. And so in this case, it's not to be replying with generic, a down coat, a wool coat. Instead, it's actually giving very specific product recommendations. A North Face jacket, a North Face Bedford down jacket. Here's the price of such a jacket, right? And then if I wanted to know where can I buy and purchase such a jacket, it's again not just saying a sporting goods store or a department store. It's giving specific vendors, Amazon, REI as an example, Dick's Sporting Goods. So in this case, that proprietary data is really key to have right. So whether you're using generative AI for your own internal purposes, but especially as a means to compete, right? So these models that are open models, pre-trained managed models, those have used a lot of data that's available on the internet. Your proprietary data is going to be even higher premium to be able to see more details about things that you can't see today. So number two, your unstructured data holds untapped potential. I mentioned that as an industry, even though we've been working towards getting data ready for use, we've been focused a lot on structured data within a tabular form. And so unstructured data has been used, but typically within a part of the business and for a particular use case. Let's say computer vision as an example. But unstructured data like documents, voice, videos, images, all of these hold the real fidelity of the business, right? The real fidelity happens within unstructured data. That's super critical for generative AI to train the models, but also to be able to partner, to be able to use to unlock value about your business. So companies really need to extend their data supply chains, extend their governance processes to be able to adapt and take in unstructured data for it to be used, not just across the company, but also even with third parties. So as an example, Accenture worked with Fortune, right? Fortune magazine. Fortune does a lot of that Fortune 500 market research. And so they have unstructured data literally as a data product, right? So think about all the blogs and all the videos that they publish. It's gone through an editorial process. So with this governed unstructured data, what we were able to do was to create a custom model that brings to bear this unstructured data that allows the user to be able to ask any question, right? I want to now plot the revenue for the 10 companies in France between 2005 and 2023, right? We can now have this dialogue with the data and ask any question and to really generate visualizations, really changing what we might have done with all the unread reports and business intelligence dashboards that we've had, now using unstructured data as a means to be able to ask a lot of questions directly with the data, right? So Love this quote from Fortune, where you can't ask a spreadsheet a question, but you can ask an LLM one, and you're not going to get an answer specific to you if you're not handling your unstructured data. Number three, synthetic data. Synthetic data is key to filling in data gaps. So synthetic data is generated data. So it could be taking some of the digital twins that many companies already have to be able to fill in gaps, or you could use even generative AI to help you generate data to, again, fill in gaps. A great use case about synthetic data that we see is with self-driving cars, right? So when people train these self-driving cars, you're not going to get data about all the dangerous situations that can happen. Instead, they're using synthetic data to fill in some of those key gaps so that we can still train an AI that is safe and that knows how to handle the situations. This is especially important when we're dealing with generative AI. I think, people are always asking about accuracy, model validation. And so again, synthetic data is really key for that. So you can imagine that if I'm looking at using generative AI for code generation as an example, and let's say a new Python vulnerability comes out. What I could do is use synthetic data to fill in all these question answer pairs of how that vulnerability might actually be realized in my business, and use this to step one, validate the models and the generative AI powered applications to see if they're still accurate, so I don't promote and continue to use something that we know is dangerous. And then we can also use this as fine tuning data, right? That then allows us to fine tune the model as we move into that stage of maturity. So again, synthetic data is really key to filling in gaps. I'm going to bring this to life with an example. So this consumer packaged goods company, they already had digital twins, and they already had some data within their warehouse. And what they were able to do was use those twins as well as the expertise of their warehouse operators to fill in gaps, right? So one thing that they could have done, right, if they wanted an AI powered warehouse, they could have tried to RFID the whole thing. And that didn't make sense from a cost perspective, right? We didn't have the case for that. So rather than just relying on reactive decision making, we're using AI, and we're going to use any operations data that they have. We're going to also create a knowledge graph that captures the domain expertise of their warehouse operators. And then we're going to use synthetic data in terms of the digital twins that they had to really fill in their current black box of the warehouse with how the layout could work. And we're using the real data, and we're using the expert knowledge at all times to make sure that these simulations make sense. And so together now we actually can fill in those gaps. And so when we're looking at being able to identify the next best action, let's say, how does the trip schedule change based off a new customer order or based off a trailer coming in late? I can use the synthetic data to fill in the gaps. I can use that expert knowledge to really contextualize the important data to be used to make a decision and to show how the output is going to be made. And the benefit of all of this is that it is something that is explainable, right? So that now I can explain when I'm making a decision. I can use the simulations to show how that might have played out. And I can use the knowledge graph to explain these are some of the considerations that we need and some of the data that we brought to bear. So again, here's a great case of using synthetic data to fill in those gaps. And this is going to be, again, a lot more important as we work with generative AI and even begin to fine tune our own custom models. Number 4, generative AI makes it easier to use data for your own purposes, right? So one of the hardest things about enterprise data is silos, right? We have different silos across the business where, let's say, our HR, our finance, our supply chain all have data, and it's really been meant and built for their purposes. But then when you're trying to use that data for your own purposes, that's where a lot of the projects happen and where things get hard. And again, here's where generative AI makes it easier to be able to find those new relationships, especially from that unstructured data that I talked about before, right? To be able to use that for your own purposes. And so in this case, really looking at how can we actually use that domain knowledge graph that I talked about earlier that captures in some of the context of how a person would want to see the data becomes really critical. right? So the same customer data that we have will have a different context if I'm looking at customer sales versus customer service. And that's exactly the use case that we worked with BMW to do. And so BMW, we have been working with them on generative AI. And we started within one part of the business within IT software. That's a very common place many companies start. And the software code, one is to make our software teams more productive. So when you have an issue, to be more productive, we got over 30% improvement in productivity, right? To be able to better address issues with the system. But within the code, there's also a lot more other information, right? There's information about the real order system at BMW, right? So you could look at the code to understand, certain logic about the order system. I can also add in another set of knowledge around the data manuals, right? The machinery manuals about the vehicles of BMW automobiles. And so this way, a different part of the business within the dealership, I can use both the data from the manuals, but also the data from the systems and the code and the order systems to be able to answer questions about what is the status of a customer's order. What is a particular configuration that a specific vehicle like an SUV can support? Is this entertainment package even supported? And so these natural language questions that come from a dealer, as an example, have a lot of context to it. I'm going to pull in information from the manuals as to what's possible, but I might actually pull in things from the live systems, right, and from the code itself that talks about order status. And so being able to now use these different traditionally siloed parts of the business, but adding this contextual layer on top that helps me find where the information is and then helps me package back exactly what I need to do to support it is really key. So this sort of domain metadata, right? This business-driven ontology that is brought to life within a knowledge graph when we're indexing it against the data that is ready to use for generative AI is a really key capability. And this is even more important as we look at this next generation of AI agents, right? So the AI agents that might automatically act and research and answer questions on behalf of humans, this particular expertise from your users, right, your true experts, is really key to capture in a knowledge graph to support that accuracy there. So number five. So number five, I think, pairs a lot with number four. If generative AI makes it so easy to use data, number five is really about generative AI is accelerating data risks, right? If it's so easy to use, that's also quite a scary thing, right? If I have finance data, I don't necessarily want my finance data to be used across different parts of the business if you don't have access to it. Especially as we're going to even share data with our partners or use third-party data. So again, treating data as a product, that proprietary data is still the most critical part. Get your governance in right there. Get your metadata tracking done there so you can programmatically monitor these usage of data. But this one around data risks is really key, right? So if we think about one, being able to add the right governance structures, right, and the right risk assessments, that's just one part. But in addition, to be able to add programmatic controls, and that's what we're seeing as part of a model switchboard or a gateway, is a really key part as we're maturing use of data for Gen AI out of proofs of concepts and into scale. Right. So let's continue with the example of vehicle sales, just as a domain example. So in this case, you might have a prompt where we're trying to change a particular order. And as we were answering questions about that prompt, we want to enrich this with real data, right? Data about the specific dealer number, specific data about the vehicle identification number. This is PII. So in this case, we want to encrypt, right, this prompt just to keep it safe from use. And as we're going to encrypt this, we're going to send this to a gateway. And within our gateway, this model switchboard, this is something that sits as a mechanism, a control plane, if you will, over a number of large language models. It's a great place to manage things like security in terms of protecting our private PII data, protecting our IP, to make sure we're going to use the models and we're passing on just the information that we're supposed to, right? So within this gateway is also encrypted. And in this gateway, we could run a small AI model that's going to then look for this PII, look for this IP. And in this case, we're going to substitute that out. We're going to create something that's anonymized, just the dealer number and the vehicle identification number, order number. That's all we need to know. And then so we're really safe in terms of what we do pass to a managed model, right? We can pass this more anonymized prompt, and then what we send back into the switchboard and gateway can then be updated in that encrypted environment with the details, right? In this case, the order number, and then that's passed to the end user. So all the sensitive data is encrypted and really programmatically protected end to end. This becomes even more exciting when we think about a new class of chips that's coming out for the GPU. So right now we're protecting it within this gateway and this control layer. So that's running on a CPU, specifically in a trusted execution environment, right? This is protecting and keep the data encrypted all the way through the compute cycle. Data is usually encrypted at rest and in motion, but when you're computing, you usually have to trust, right, that environment until today. Now we're going to use this new hardware-based solution that is very performant. It's as easy as picking the unique hardware instance that runs in a cloud. And then that's how you then can host some of this capability. So again, the even more exciting part is the GPUs that are coming out that are going to use the same technology. And this will allow us to be able to even train and run some of these large models on purely encrypted data. So think about how important this is as an industry where we might want to bring together different industries to be able to train an industry model, or working across the different parts of your business to be able to create a fine-tuned custom model just for you. But at the minimum, you can start with when you're using data across your organization, one of the ways to do it is just encrypt it all and then use this at this switchboard or gateway level to really depend on the use case, what is allowed to be seen and what's allowed to be passed through, and what needs to be protected. So I'm going to finalize this list with number 6. Generative AI applied to data jumpstarts data readiness, right? So the use of generative AI in code has been something that we've been talking about as an industry. A lot of data is code, and a lot of the things that you might do in software development, like thinking about requirements generation, reverse engineering, and trying to understand a system before you change it, being able to even generate test data, that applies to data migration, data modernization, and just managing your data estate. So think about, how we practice data. I mentioned before, less BI and less reports, more general purpose question answering using generative AI. It could be, when we're creating a data product and some of the metadata tagging, I might use generative AI to be able to write the initial data product definition, even some of the column description names. I might be able to create some of the data pipelines that I have. So I want to share an example of what we're doing here. So in this example, with the global pharma, and they were doing a migration project. They were moving from Oracle to Postgres. And as they were doing that, if we looked at the entire body of work, we looked at 3 places to begin applying generative AI to really accelerate this process. One is in that detailed user story definition. So this is a place where we might have had to rely on some of these domain experts' time quite a lot. And so by using generative AI, we were able to still have the initial conversation, but then use that plus a number of other documents to really help create those detailed user story requirements. 2, being able to generate some of the new test cases, and then the testing automation takes care of the rest. And then 3, being able to do the actual code conversion, Oracle to Postgres. And so in each of these 3 tasks, we got over 80% at the task-wise level efficiency. So amazing improvements. But this story is to share that even with that huge improvement, if you look at the overall program, we still got significant improvement, 15% savings in time and man days in a year. but it's not the same level of the 80-90% or even 30-40%, because even though those tasks were really able to be automated with generative AI, they were critical parts within the program, but it wasn't everything you do, right? If you think about the day in the life of a data migration modernization program, you're doing a lot of other things besides writing detailed user stories, generating test cases, and hands on keyboard writing the code conversion, right? There's a lot of other things to do. And so this real savings is there. Use generative AI to jumpstart your readiness. And as we're going to build out, right, interventions like the three I mentioned, there's a lot of other places that you can begin to pick up the muscle, right, and develop the muscle that's going to change how we do generative AI applied to data as a whole. So here's 42 that we've identified and have started working on. And the point isn't necessarily that you have to do all of these, but like in what we did with this global pharma company, pick the ones that are going to have the biggest bang for the buck, and really think about one, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Is that enough of a task that it makes sense to invest to get the savings? And then two, what's the match within the model? So I just talked about Oracle to Postgres, right? That's the easier one to do. If I'm thinking about some other types of use cases, right? Some cases of SQL not being necessarily ANSI SQL compliant, or certain systems that aren't necessarily in the corpus of what these open source pre-trained models would do. So things like SAP is a good example. Really think about the applicability of the use case to how you might apply generative AI to data readiness, but I just want to share that the case is real. So with that in mind, right, I just wanted to summarize. We just talked about 6 things that we need to think about, new data essentials that have changed with generative AI. The most important one, the key takeaway, is your proprietary data being your competitive advantage. If you haven't been investing in your data, now is a great point to get the attention of your C-suite and your board, right, to be able to invest. This is how companies are going to be competing. Number 2, it is changing some of what we've done before, doing, in addition to structured data, paying a lot more attention to your unstructured data. So investments in things like vector databases and extending your management and governance into unstructured data is really key here. 3, a synthetic data is key to filling in gaps. And so thinking even about using generative AI to support your domain experts to be able to help fill in gaps beyond what your current data can do. 4, generative AI makes it easier to use data for your own purposes, and part of that really relies on capturing some of that collective intelligence, the domain knowledge within a company. So thinking about using a knowledge graph becomes really, really key to move beyond vector database type similarity into something that is more contextualized for the specific use case. 5, generative AI accelerates data risks. So certainly extend your governance and your responsible data and AI practices, but think about some of these new technologies like confidential compute to be able to add programmatic protections. And then finally, 6, I just listed a whole bunch of things. I think it might sound overwhelming in some ways, but really generative AI applied to data jumpstarts readiness. We're going to be doing things differently, right? So less dashboards and reports, more open-ended question answering. Data migration and modernization done the old way is now going to be much more enhanced with generative AI agents and interventions. So with that in mind, thank you so much.